we moved, finished language school, moved to the South South in 1960, September 1st. I had had the survey trip earlier with some seminary students and missionary friend and the pastor, and they took us to all the main little towns there, villages and shade trees and whatever, boat landings. And so I just started. I made a list had 18 places where I was going to go once a month, and there wasn't anybody there to set up a schedule or anything. It was just my schedule to just go and start singing, and when people got together, then I'd preach to them and answer questions and give out tracts and so on, and just start sowing the gospel seed that they'd never heard. About the second or third place I got to, because I kind of had it in a circle geographically through the province, I got to the town of Bangkla, which was the second largest town in the province next to provincial capital where we lived. But it was not a big town, but probably had more people than you would in an American town that size because of the housing. So I had a couple of places there that I preached at, and one was on either side of the canal that came off the river. So on the closer side, it was in front of a kind of an old temple and a shade tree, and quite a bit of room. So I'd just start singing, and kind of a novelty there, big tall white guy. And they would come around and I'd preach to them and answer questions and give out tracts. Well, that day, I think it was at the second place because it was across the little canal down by the city hall, closer to the river. Now, the city hall was not anything fancy. It was just a plain little building, but that's where it was. And so I was preaching there, and this real nice-looking fella, well-dressed, I don't know if he had on a suit, but he had a tie. And he came up to me afterwards, and he asked me what the Baptists were doing in Thailand. And I don't know if he told me first or later that he was the mayor of Bangkla. And I used to know his name. I can't remember it now. But we became sort of friends in a way during those years we were there. But at that time, he asked me what we were doing. And I said, well, we're here to try to help the Thai people. And I said physically and spiritually. And we're especially interested in folks out away from the hospitals and all that can't get very good medical care, maybe. And so we have some doctors coming. We have 3 missionary doctors. One of them is studying the Thai now, but there's 2 about to come. And then we're going to have some other people on the survey committee. And we're planning to locate a hospital, build a hospital somewhere down in southeast Thailand in one of the 6 provinces. So they're going to look at each place and see what looks the most favorable, transportation and so on. Well, he was very excited. He said, oh boy, I forgot what he said in Thai now, but he said, that sounds good. He said, we've been wanting a hospital here for a long time, but we didn't have enough money to build one. And he said, if you folks feel like you could come here and put your hospital here, we would be so happy, and we will help you all we can. He said, we can't give you land, but we'll be sure you get a fair price. If your doctors could come out here and meet with us and talk about it. I said, well, I'll arrange that if you'd like to do it. He said, we would. So we set up a time about a couple of weeks later, and I think the governor was there, if I remember right, and the head of the provincial medical department, and maybe the head policeman, and another official or 2, and probably another medical person or 2. But there's quite a few people there at the city hall. And so we had 2 of our doctors, and we had Rosemary was going to be the head of our nurses, and our mission treasurer that handled a lot of the business dealings, and myself. And so we met with them for a couple of hours or so, and then they took us over to see a piece of land. It had been a mango orchard, but a lot of trees had already been cut down. I don't know what they were doing with it, but very close to the road, the main road that came into town, just barely off of it. And they said, we can get this property. Well, our doctors, their eyes were getting big, and they were looking around, excited. And now he said, we're going to have to go survey the other 5 provinces first. But then we will meet, and the committee will talk about it and pray about it and decide. So I don't remember how long it took, but it was a few months, several months actually. And they sent word that we prayed about it, and it was unanimous that we come to Bangkla. They liked the idea of having the river, where people could come by water, as well as the road. And the cooperation of the city folks and everything was promising. And so that's where they wound up putting the hospital. And it was finally, now that would have been in 1962, before we went on furlough, our first furlough, but the hospital was finished and opened officially in April of 1963. Had a big day there with all the officials and everybody. Wonderful opening. And our doctors were ready to go to work. It was a 25-bed hospital. Doesn't sound very big, but we could put people on the floor on mats, their style. And we'd have as many as 45 or 50 patients sometimes if we had a bad wreck or not a plague, but an epidemic of some kind of illness. And our doctors learned by experience, and some of them learned to treat new disease. And we had a library upstairs in the doctor's kind of a lounge with a lot of medical books, and they'd go up there, and if they weren't sure about something, they'd go look it up and study up on it. And we had people come from, I know they came past other government hospitals to get there. Most of the government hospitals at that time, even, and this was mostly in the provincial capitals like the town that our family lived in at that time, the Chatham province. The hospital was called the slaughterhouse by the people. And they dreaded going there, most of them, but they would, if they got real sick. But they didn't have much confidence because most of the doctors that worked there had a private practice of their own. And a lot of times they would give them, an examination and then send them over to their private clinic where they could charge them individually. Now the government hospital itself, it was practically free. It was very, very low cost. And these doctors were also being paid by the government, but not too much, I think. So they were trying to make a living. And the hospital was built and ministered to people. I know we'd ask them where they were from, and they would come in from over 100 miles. Some of them, they would pass maybe 1 or 2 government hospitals to get there, because our doctors were very concerned and compassionate, and took more time with them, and they just realized they were getting better care there. The doctors that we had close around there were mostly fellows who had been in the Thai Army and trained to be corpsmen, or they could give you a shot maybe or do some little stuff, but they also had to deal with some of the superstitions that some of the Buddhist monks believed. If you had a broken arm, they could blow on your arm and say a few words and it would come back together, and so a lot of our patients had problems, reactions from bad treatment, and so our doctors would have to try to get that cleared up and then get them fixed up right. One of my senior missionaries was asked to be the chaplain of the hospital when it got started, well, really in the building process. So we were still working, all around in the villages and so on. But when we had our first furlough, in May of 62. We were home, for a while, and the hospital was being built. But mentioned earlier today in another interview about for a week back in 62, before we left on furlough, our medical people wanted to have a series of meetings in the village to kind of introduce the people to our doctors and the hospital work and so on. So they asked me to set it up, and we had in a large Chinese school with quite a large yard. We did it outside at night, one night, all through that week, 5 or 6 nights. And we had, some music to get folks together, and then each one of our medical people would have a night. So one night would be this doctor, and another night the next. And they would share a testimony that we'd translate for them and tell the folks why they were there and their concern for them, and bring in the gospel witness some. And then we showed some Christian movies, and then we would have a prayer and close it out and just talk to people that wanted to come up and get acquainted or talk with anybody in our group. So we had a pretty good introduction, and at the same time, we started an English teaching class there in the market close by. Just not long before we came home to the States that time, to sort of get more and more exposure, to the hospital that was coming along. So it was up and running and ready to go by April or May of 63 when we got back on furlough. And then in a couple of years later, the fellow missionary who had been the chaplain, they were asked to move to another job in Bangkok, and since I had been the one that knew the territory from preaching all around there, and they asked me and my family to move out to the hospital town and to take the job there at the hospital. Our girls weren't very involved. They were going off to school in Bangkok by that time, just about. But Bob did a lot of things in the hospital, translating some and helping various ways, and my wife Maxine got involved. I think she played some for us every morning before time to go to work. We had a devotional time or worship time up in the chapel upstairs, and I was in charge of that. But we had different Christian workers testify, and Mom played and sang some, and I was just trying to encourage the workers to really show the love of Christ to the patients as they came in that day. And that was pretty well attended, and that was part of it. And then we had a little brief preaching service about mid-morning out in the waiting room, but it was an open room where they came and waited for the name to be called to go in to be examined. But our doctors needed a little break, and they took turns about preaching some too. I did most of it, but we had some Thai Christians that did it, and we had a little short preaching service, and then I would be there, walking around talking with people. And then I had the opportunity to go back in the inpatient department and visit with each of the patients and their families, and sometimes explain more to them because I knew the language a little bit better because the doctors had just finished language school. And sometimes I could elaborate or explain why this was being done or that was being done. And I had a chance to witness to them. And those that were interested or friendly, or I'd ask them if they'd mind if I come to see them at their homes and talk a little bit. And they said, no, we'd love to have you. I mean, they thought it would be, even though we were just ordinary folks, they thought it was special to have a foreigner come to their home. Sometimes our doctors would have certain patients that they'd like follow-up on. So I'd go visit them and could bring the message back. So I spent a lot of my time, almost every afternoon, doing that after I got through in the hospital, about lunchtime. I would ask people where they lived. It was funny. A lot of them, they'd say, well, you catch the boat and go down to this big tree and go around over there by another tree. I mean, there weren't any addresses out there. So it was kind of a geographical survey trip almost every time to find them. And I got a lot of walking in, after I got off the boat. Now, some of them didn't live on the river, and I could drive the Land Rover or the van pretty close to their home and park it and then walk in through the rice fields. Just depend. And some of them, as we got to know each other better, I said, well, if you think your village friends would be interested in hearing about this, I'd be glad to come at night. And so I had quite a few night adventures out, sometimes by myself, and sometimes I had some folks from the hospital went with me. And depend on the location of the house, sometimes you could drive in off the highway and get to a temple or something. But I have parked, by the side of the road, and I had some headlights stolen one time in all of those trips. And our pastor, he was reluctant to go with me at night. Now, he went with me at daytime, but he said, well, he'd heard about some of the gangs around, and the bad people out through the countryside, and maybe it's the communists or something. So a lot of these places I went by myself, and nobody ever bothered me, so praise the Lord for that. One time we had a lady come to see us there in Bangkla, in the hospital town, and she told me that she had come to the police station. It was a lady interested in Thai architecture. She was from one of the schools up north, and she wanted to come and see a certain house that she'd heard about. And she went to the police station, and they said, well, we don't know, but said, go over to Ajahn Stewart's house. Said he knows this territory better than we do. Well, I didn't know about that house. I was sorry. I wish I could have known. But I felt, well, that's kind of interesting that the police realized I was out there walking around, and checking things out. We had these, like, taxi boats. Some of them were bigger than smaller, and you could just talk to the driver and agree on a price, how long you need to be out, and so on. And I had all these boat rides, for not too much money without having to buy a boat. I got carried away one day. I couldn't hardly stand it. There had been a lady, fairly young mother, brought her baby in real sick, and the doctors took good care, and the nurses, and the baby got well. And the mom was there and got the baby to take her home. She had her in her arms. No, she handed her to some friend. We were talking out in the waiting room. She got down on her knees and started kissing my feet. I mean, think about that. And, I was trying to get her up. She was just thanking me, for saving her baby and what all they'd done for her. And, of course, I was saying I appreciate it, and we're glad to do it. And it's Jesus that loves your baby and you. And I didn't get to see her. I saw her another time or two, but not a chance to talk much. But I still remember how I was gotten away with, but it showed how much she really appreciated it. And a lot of, the doctors were doing all the work really, but I was explaining it and spending more time with the family, so sometimes I got credit more than they did, but it was very, very satisfying to help people and see them get well. And it was sad because there were some that came just like some in the Bible that turned away from Jesus, and the doctors would tell them, well, you have this problem and that one, and we can, I believe we can help you, and with the Lord's help, get you well, but some of them just didn't want to stay, or they didn't trust us or something, and you see these, and the doctors would see them leave and know that they're not going to live very long because They just weren't getting any help, but that's part of it, I guess, being a doctor. I mixed and mingled with them, all I could. I'd eat down to one of the little shops there a lot and talk to people. And of course, a lot of the patients, some of the patients were from there. I mean, quite a few were. And I just could talk to them. And then I was the interim pastor of the church for a while, and I, visit people there in town quite a bit that had been to the hospital. When we left the last time, I guess it's when we knew that we were going to be moving back to Chachingsao to stay the rest of the time. But you remember that meal, don't you? So I guess we were just going on furlough, but we didn't know for sure we'd be coming back. But yeah, the city people, and I don't know what part the mayor had in it, if any. We also, we got to know the Nyamper. He would be like the head man of the county. And he lived in that house over there in front of us in our first place. And he was not there for a while, and I used that when I was writing one of my books, but had some contact with him, and we'd met him that first meeting too. And I'm puzzled, son, because I've told some people, I might have told you, it seems to me like they would do something to honor the doctors instead of, who were really treating them, for their disease. But I never heard of anything like that happening, but I hope it did. I just don't know. But yeah, they had that meal for us, and it really surprised me. We tried to be part of the town, and you were a famous soccer player. I think you played with the guys, the older guys, and we mixed and mingled. Some of the missionary families were a little more Americanized, I guess, and they did things together, and we all went to church together and things, but it just depended, I guess, on the family. But I remember New Christmas Eve one night. Do you remember that skinny Santa Claus that came and brought us a pineapple? He was skinnier than Ben. That's a little guy that worked down at the city hall. And these were pineapples sent by the mayor to different families. I guess he sent one to each doctor's family. I don't know, but when he brought ours on a bicycle, and he had the Santa Claus hat that was about 3 sizes too big. I don't know if he'd been drinking or not. I kind of wondered, because he kind of had that reputation. But he was a delivery Santa Claus, and he brought us a pineapple and said, Merry Christmas, or however you said it. But that meal really kind of blew me away, because I could tell there must be some respect there for us. And you remember about the whiskey part, do you? Usually when you have a Thai feast anywhere, not in the churches, but anywhere, they'll have a bottle of whiskey and a bottle of, what kind of water is that called? Soda water, yeah, on the table. So most of the guys would mix them up some whiskey and water to drink, but no signs of a bottle. And somebody announced over the speaker system that they were keeping it off the table in honor of the Stewarts who did not drink. But they had some back there. If anybody just had to have some, just come on back and get it. But I don't remember how many people went, but at least they had to be seen, and they couldn't do it in secret. But that was a compliment to us. I was thankful and honored to have a part in getting the hospital established there. And I was glad that it was in territory that I had some knowledge of from earlier preaching and all.